Hi, Chris. Very excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, nice to be here, Cedric.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about customer success, the evolution about customer success, and who better to talk to about this with Chris, who is a Senior VP of Totango, the customer success platform. Chris, maybe briefly tell a bit your journey until your role today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I am the Senior Vice President of Customer Success at Totango Catalyst. So, we recently merged the two platforms, which is pretty exciting. So, maybe we can touch on that a little bit later. I began my CS career prior to really customer success even being a thing.
Hmm.
I started that back. I was at a company called On24 for almost 2 decades. They're a webinar-based marketing platform. And when I started with that company, I really kind of ran a lot of the enablement, training, support, technical account management, and then ultimately, when customer success kind of became a thing, we evolved those teams into a customer success motion. And so it's been really interesting to see the evolution of customer success over the last 20 years,
Hmm.
and it's been something that has been really helpful as I've gotten into leading the customer success team at a customer success company at Totango and Catalyst. It's helping us kind of move things forward as it relates to what is next for the customer success space. How are we
Yeah.
going to evolve it from where we were, which was even though it was proactive, it wasn't as engaged, I don't think, as it is now. When we start thinking about revenue and growth and the impact on the business. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I really want to cover with you the evolution about CS. And in my experience, a lot of companies, they moved customer support people into CS roles, while the role, the content is completely different. So how do you look at where it comes from, how to start with it, and then what is your take on the evolution of CS?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, when we think about where CS started, as I mentioned, I had a technical account management team, and in evolving that team into customer success, it's the same, and it's also very, very different, right?
Hmm.
And that was kind of, I would call it, let's call it CS 1.0, so early customer success, which was, everybody was focused on, instead of being reactive, being proactive, and really kind of starting to drive more outcomes and paying attention to what really helps a customer achieve value with your product. So those were early on indications. And what we found is a lot of times people who were evolved from maybe support or technical account management into a customer success role, can be good in certain areas and cannot be good
Hmm.
in certain areas, right? What we've seen, and when we think about the evolution of customer success, and what we're seeing and what I'm seeing at Tango Catalyst and with a lot of our customers and in the industry, is that customer success really does need to start not just being proactively involved with their customer. It's not just about QBRs and cadence calls and things like that, but it's about really making sure that they're understanding the value that a customer is getting, driving that value, and then ultimately, driving growth and having, a hand in what the revenue, picture looks like for your company long term, right? So
Yeah.
it's driving that predictable revenue growth from your install base. And that only happens when you've got a customer that's really achieving value and are achieving their
Hmm.
outcomes. But that's really kind of where the engine starts. And then you start
Yeah.
building into that and getting the growth and kind of that predictable customer led growth that we like to talk about at Tatango and Catalyst. So,
Yeah, and I hear you talking that there's quite some, I'm going to call it hybridization between traditional account management functions and maybe
yeah.
traditional evangelization slash marketing functions moving into CS. Um, will there be like still a fixed barrier between regional account managers versus CS, or how do you see this evolving?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's not a one size fits all for sure, right?
Hmm.
As we think about different companies, company sizes, and what markets you're approaching, what verticals you're approaching, there's certainly a case where you would have, an account manager, a regional account manager, somebody involved along with a customer success person.
Yeah.
In some cases, that will be a combined role, right? As we look at the evolution of customer success and customer success managers being more directly involved in understanding some of the revenue play and how to drive growth, within that, there are going to be cases where you're going to need to consolidate that. I mean, if we've seen anything over the last year, if it's taught us anything, it's taught us that, there is going to be a consolidation of roles. We're seeing a lot of teams kind of thinning out and being as efficient as they can with who's handling what within the customer journey. So, when we think about strategic and enterprise level account management, there is a pretty strong difference in what that type of role would do as it relates to that over a customer success manager, and there's a lot of differences when you think about market segmentation and things like that as well, right? So yes, I do see a collapse of some of those things in some markets, in some spaces, in some segments, but when you start thinking about really large strategic enterprise accounts, I absolutely see a need where you would still have, a customer success manager, maybe an account manager, maybe an account executive, and different overlays based on what you're doing and how you're doing it. So definitely not a one size fits all for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And it also has to do with probably the size of the companies you selling into, how technical is the product. I was working for an integrator a long time ago, and we had a service manager, which was like the role of a customer success manager. That person was involved into all the technical aspects, making sure that the contracts kept running. And as soon as he spotted from his side upsell opportunities, then I was involved. And I see similar things happening. There were similar things happening at Indeed and so forth. So when we look then at, I don't know if you said there's no one size fits all, but if you look at a regular mid-sized company versus an enterprise type of company, what would be like the difference in the setup?
I would say that for many mid-sized companies, what I've seen is that you'll have a CS team and this is where it's kind of evolving, I would say, to where the CS team is more responsible for some of that revenue, let's call it post sales, right? But so an initial deal acquisition comes in, that deal has gone through the process, and then the CS team is now, I don't want to say owning the customer, but they're owning that relationship. They're quarterbacking that relationship as it relates to, how to make sure that the customer's getting value, making sure that they're achieving their outcomes, all the things that we really want to hold to as far as tenets for customer success. That's really let's call it our North Star, right? The customer bought you for a reason. Do you understand what that is? Do you understand what the measures of the KPIs are that they're trying to achieve and grow to or adjust to? And then the CSM is kind of responsible for that. But then, through that process, that should ultimately result in, in growth, protection of that revenue, and then growth of the revenue as well. So I've seen in more of the smaller mid-sized companies, that is typically, and we're seeing it kind of trend to where that's handled more by the customer success management team. It just creates some efficiencies. Like I said, when you start thinking about the larger companies, that's going to split out a little differently depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it. But just overall, we are definitely seeing a trend towards customer success kind of owning more revenue on the install base.
Yeah, and then we move into the NPS, right? So when customer success was initially incentivized by having a high NPS score, now we move into that revenue responsibility. So first of all, is NPS still relevant to measure CS performance? And secondly, then what are then some typical metrics that you can use then instead?
Yeah, I mean, NPS is a hot topic, that you could have long discussions on. It's interesting. The question that you asked directly is NPS a good measure for customer success?
Exactly.
And I would say, yes and no, right? NPS is a measure. It is it is a piece of data within the puzzle that you're looking at to understand where you are with your customer base. That said, if you are driving compensation, around NPS for a customer success manager, I feel like you're missing the mark, right? Because NPS is a good baseline. It is a standardized question, and it's going to give you insights. More importantly, it's something that you can action as it relates to your business. And almost more important than the NPS score is typically the comments that you're getting from the NPS score and how are you reacting to that. It's interesting. I had a story a long time ago, my wife and I went to visit a theater for the first time. They just opened up. It was one of those years where they have, food and things like that. And so we went in, we sat down, I ordered, a cocktail. The movie started, and I didn't get the drink until almost the end of the movie, right? And it was like super frustrating, but not the end of the world. It was like I got it. It was fine. But the next day, I got an email with an NPS question, and so I, gave them a detractor score, added in the notes the reason why, and hit submit, and was expecting it to go into the black box that it normally does. I actually got an email and then a call from the manager of the theater the next day. He wanted to know some specifics about the experience I had, where it was, because he said, I want to make sure that we improve it. It wasn't to get anybody in trouble. It was just we want to improve our processes. He sent me, a couple of coupons so that I could get a free movie in the future. And I was like, okay, a lot of times we see NPS absolutely unacted on. And that's more frustrating than anything, because you reply to it, you take the time to give somebody a comment, and then it goes into the abyss. So somebody's using it as a measure to maybe beat up on their CSM, but they're not really taking the data to really improve what it is that they're doing. So, NPS is good. It is a company-wide measure, right? It has to do with product. It has to do with your billing and your sales and your CS team and everything else. So
And the personal relationship you said as well, right?
Absolutely. And then if you're taking it in real time, and you're with Totango, for example, we have our NPS scores. If you were to fill out an NPS score, it pipes into a Slack channel that's internal that all of our executive team is on. And so I see every NPS as soon as it hits, as soon as it hits the database, right? And we look at it and we're like, okay, hey, what's going on with this customer? Why is this the case? They said they didn't like this. This was a problem. I thought we fixed that problem. And so we have a back channel dialogue so that we can make sure that we reach out to the customer, resolve the issue, and improve upon that. If we didn't ask the NPS question, I wouldn't get that data, and I might be flying a little more blind. So, am I going to hang bonuses, and am I going to put all of my eggs in the NPS basket? Absolutely not. But can you glean some really important information? Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's a piece of the data when you're looking at the overall health of your business and your customers.
Okay, and then if you look at some more relevant, if I can call it, metrics, then what would then be the things that you look at? Is it then pure retention, pure upsell? What are you looking at?
Yeah, retention is great, and so is upsell, but those are typically your lagging indicators, right? Yeah. From a customer success standpoint, really it's about value, and it's about, what we would call business outcomes. So, if you come, to Totango, if I'm going to Indeed, I'm going to be purchasing that tool or that product for a specific reason. And so the question is, why? Why are you buying the product? And then the second thing is, what is your current measure? What are you expecting that product to do for you? How is it going to improve whatever it is you're trying to improve, right? And so then you look at that and you say, okay, let's get a baseline measurement. And as a CS professional, my job should be to make sure that we have that baseline measure, and that we're driving towards improving that. We're achieving the outcomes that you purchased the product for in the very first place, right? Yeah. So outcome attainment or value attainment is something that is really, I would call it a North Star for customer success. Because if you can prove value, then when you come to a renewal discussion, it's a non-discussion. It's a non-issue. They're going to renew because you can show them the value or the ROI of the product that you have, and then it's just a matter of how much more and how much longer do they want to continue to get that value. So so it's interesting that we talk a lot about health scores, and we talk a lot about utilization and product utilization, and how many times did you log into my platform? What all features did you use? And those are all good things. Again, these are all pieces of data within the puzzle that are going to determine a picture of the customer. But if you're strictly looking at utilization of a product, then you've got some blind spots. They can be using your product right up to the point where they stop using it, right? And we've all seen that, and it's frustrating. So having truly tangible value-based outcomes that you're measuring and scoring your customer against and kind of tracking through is really the key measurement from my standpoint on customer success.
Okay, and then when we look at the expectations that the client had prior buying the solution, What is your take into that CS has the authority to block a sale because they see from miles ahead that they will churn? And I've spoken with a couple of companies and they say, okay, this is the position we are in right now. We let CS say no if we feel they will churn.
Yeah. It's interesting. I hosted a panel discussion, kind of a hot take session earlier this week with Kevin McIntyre, who's the CRO from Dealfront. And we were discussing ICP, your ideal customer profile. And as we were talking about, is this the year of customer success or is it the year of sales? The answer was it's the year of the ideal customer profile. It was kind of where he landed. And what's interesting is, as a CRO, he's looking at it saying, not every customer is the right customer for your product. And, now does the CS team have the authority to block that? That's an interesting discussion and certainly another potential hot take. But as a sales leader, as a CS leader, we should be involved in looking at and understanding, hey, what is the value that a customer is working to attain? And if it's a misfit customer, if we're bringing them in and we know that this is not a long-term relationship customer, we need to have eyes wide open. We don't need to have expectations on, a big, lifetime value out of that customer because quite frankly, it's just not going to exist. So, there are definitely thoughts on how to control that, and how to measure it. It's always hard, like at the end of the quarter, everybody's trying to get those sales in. So, telling somebody they can't sell something because it's not a fit is going to be a tricky conversation. But it is something that needs to be paid attention to as you're looking about the long-term success of your business.
Yeah, and it is a hard thing, right? Because if you want to have your number, you say, I want to have that client in, but then ultimately it's a success, the lifetime value, the time you spend in the customer acquisition cost, and nobody is really thinking about this when you try to get that sale in. So it definitely is important to look at it. So
Yeah.
we've been talking already a couple of times around sales and marketing roles and what I call the hybridization between them. So when we're looking at a collaboration between a marketing and CS, and then I think about evangelization, having strategic sessions with the client. What would then be a good approach in having a strong collaboration between marketing and CS, and what role would sales and or account management then have into this?
Yeah. It's a very interesting topic that I've had a lot of conversations on with different people. It's interesting when you think about marketing, sales, and CS. Karen Budell, who's our CMO, likes to call that the three-legged stool, right? I mean, those are some of the tenets when we think about go-to-market. And if you look at the sales and marketing relationship, kind of pre-sale, pipeline generation, things like that, that's typically a pretty well-refined machine, right? I mean, that has been done over and over again. It's been kind of long-standing. So those relationships are pretty well forged and typically running pretty well. When we think about the marketing in CS for marketing to your customer base and how they support the CS function as it relates to protecting and growing your revenue, that's typically a little more of an untapped function, right? And it is something that in our organization, Karen and I are working very closely on to make sure that, hey, how do we do this better? How can we work better together to make sure that we are driving, an efficient and effective motion for our customer base, and how does marketing play into that? And it can be a number of different functions, but one of the things we do, which I think is super helpful, is a customer advisory board. And that's driven by our marketing team in collaboration with myself and with the CS team. And it's really helping us to get a better sense of not only the market, where we want to go directionally, not just from a product standpoint, but just from an industry perspective. And that kind of alignment really helps kind of drive a good focus for our customer base, for where we're going as a product and a company. And then when you start folding in sales into that, if you're looking at, for example, let's talk about expansion motions. So now you're looking at whether you're a land and expand kind of a motion function, or if you're just trying to organically grow your customer base. If you're folding sales into that specifically on more of that land expand motion, having marketing provide air cover on that, is a key aspect. So, if you start thinking about getting those three teams tightly aligned on how to execute, you'll definitely see the fruits from that.
Yeah. Yeah, and as I said earlier, it's definitely not one size fits all, because I'm thinking about, like, if you have global account directors in the land and expand motion, the role that CS plays in identifying the upsell, it becomes really, on the one hand, a project management approach, and then on the second hand, like collaboration even with the client and how to successfully expand your business with the client into their install base.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something too that, one of the things that we've seen as you start getting into that level of intricacy across sales, across customer success, across marketing, and this is the shameless plug for Totango and Catalyst. I mean, that's what we do, right? We've got a platform that is specifically designed to try to help support the technology and the infrastructure and alignment of those teams post sale, that help you not just understand and identify where those opportunities are, but then how do you tap that market, and how do you help really evolve and grow that in a way that scales. And so, there are certainly a lot of tools out there that do it, but having people aligned on that technology, and that's where we see a lot of the problems, is that you got sales on one thing, you got CS on something else, you got marketing on something else. And so people are working in disparate systems, and you may do some integration, and that's good. But when you can get everybody aligned and in sync on a single kind of sheet of music, as it were, a single source of truth, then you can create some significant efficiencies of scale there.
Yeah, I strongly believe it. And then when we move then slightly into your role into CS leadership, briefly, we spoke about prior to the recording about your role as a CS leader. So when I was selling into tech, my leaders, they always told me, go talk to our CTO, our CIO, to know how to talk to how to speak the language. Yeah. I assume that your salespeople are coming a lot to you to ask everything about CS, how to be approached, and so forth. How do you go about this?
Yeah. Well, as we discussed, I mean, being a customer success leader in a customer success industry for the customer success platform is a little bit meta, as it were, right? Yeah. I mean, it's definitely interesting, and it gives us the chance really to, we've started, and especially with the recent merger with Totango and Catalyst. We've started all sorts of motions just to really, make sure that we're being our best customer, right? It's easy to get into the phrase, the cobbler that doesn't have shoes. It's kind of similar to that. It's easy to get into a motion where you're spending so much time supporting your customers that you're not able to do that internally yourself. So, making sure that we're kind of driving, those motions and understanding the value of that is certainly key. And then collaborating with our internal teams, with our sales teams. Mm-hmm. I mean, I spend a ton of time, with my sales counterparts, discussing approach and what are the needs, and what do CS leaders, really, want, and what are they looking for, when it comes to a solution. And it's interesting too, the CEO of Catalyst, who's now our co-CEO, Edward, he was a CS leader as well. I mean, that was where he started, and he was in a situation where he needed a technology to help support him as he was supporting the business. So he comes from a background of customer success, which helps us really make sure that we're pointing in the right direction as it relates to the product and the evolution of where the practice is going as a whole. So yeah, it is fun. It's definitely fun being in the industry that you're supporting, and it gives me a chance to really talk to a lot of folks internally and externally, about the direction that we're going and how we can support people in that.
Yeah. And when we go then a bit deeper into your role as a CS leader, we spoke already about the key metrics, but then when we talk about leadership, coaching, and leading other CS leaders, what are some basic processes that you have? How do you coach CS leaders and CS people? Can you go a bit deeper into this?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that when I think about just coaching CS leaders or CS people, it is more, it's understanding, and I'm going to go back to the value conversation, but it's really understanding the value of your customer, and then we look at it and we talk to the customer as customer success. Our goal is to make sure that we're, very acutely listening to our customer and what their needs are. And so if I were to coach any CS leader and say, hey, what's the first thing you need to do? It's spend an incredible amount of time talking with your customers, right? Talk with them to find out what their needs are, talk to them and find out what are their expectations, and as we said before, how are you measuring the success of those expectations, and the attainment of those. And so, listening to your customer is by far the best thing you can do to level and skill up on certain aspects of customer success. And then when we think about the evolution of customer success and where that's going, being open to having those revenue-based conversations, which I know a lot of CS leaders have kind of kept at arm's length, and they want to be the trusted advisor, but they don't want to ruin their ability to talk to the customer because they're afraid if they get into a negotiation that's going to taint how they support them, and and that just really shouldn't be the case. So we have to have real conversations about how to best do that, how to best manage that, and make sure that you're aligned across your entire organization in that front. So I would just say be a good partner internally with your product team, with your marketing team, with your sales team. Those are places where you have to start as a CS leader, and even as a CS individual contributor or director. You need to understand not only the internal functions within that, but then also, what are the needs of the customer and how can we make sure that we're supporting them as the voice of the customer internally.
Yeah. And do you see then also an evolution in the different types of sub roles within CS? I mean, I know companies that have evangelists within CS, other people are more very strongly in usage of products, and others are better into, starting those commercial conversations. Do you see this as part of the entire skill set of CS, or do you see it becoming segmented?
Yeah, I hate to go back to it depends, but it really does. I mean, if you're in a smaller organization and you've got, a dozen, 20 CSMs, you're not going to be able to separate those out by, by certain criteria. So, if you've got hundreds of customer success managers and you can have some that are specifically focused on various aspects of the business, well, then of course that would make sense. When I grew the team at On24, we had specific CSMs that were over certain segments. And then we had CS team that were overlays based on certain products or certain features and functions. So, that helps kind of provide you some of the technical expertise in those scenarios. But again, it very much depends. But we all know that certain people gravitate towards, maybe it's more technical as opposed to more contractual or commercial discussions, and that's okay. And given the size of your organization, you may be able to cater to that. You may not. So those are things you have to kind of look at on an individual basis, just depending on, and we were talking about this before the podcast, how technical is your product? How mature is your product? How evolved is it? If you're a startup company and you've got a fast changing product that's got a lot of adjustments, okay, you're going to need more technical, CS resources to be able to help support that.
Yeah, obviously, clear. All right, so I would like to limit the podcast to 30 minutes. We are almost there, so let us start from the beginning. And we've been talking about ideal organizations, what we're looking at, but then let's say you talk to a founder of a startup, they're looking into building their first CS team, the first 3-4 people. How to start, where to start? And maybe it's also a very holistic question, but what's the theory and how would you do it?
Yeah, I would start with a CS leader that is somebody that, obviously, if you need to get somebody who has done this before. So if I was in a startup and I was hiring a CS leader, I would be looking at some of their skills and making sure that I've got a little bit of a holistic approach, for that resource. So somebody who has done some of the commercial negotiations, somebody that is technically skilled and able to handle that. But also, one of the key aspects of customer success is being able to manage that customer. So you have to have very solid skills as it relates
Mhm.
to, dealing with escalations, dealing with customers who are upset about certain aspects of things. So you need to have that kind of a temperament in a CS leader, and then and then start building the team after that, with people who can scale and grow, and grow those teams. So obviously, how you would do that if you had 3 or 4 people on your CS team, you would have a few CSMs. You would start being able to segment out. Maybe you're doing it by ARR at first, and so you're saying, okay, here are my larger customers. I'm going to have a smaller
Mhm.
book of business for each one of those CSMs on those, so I can protect that revenue.
Yeah.
And then for your long tail customers, the smaller ones, maybe I have one to many, or maybe I go or for a full on, just a digital motion.
Yeah.
And that would be something that we do a lot of, at Tatango, is supporting people in, kind of a scaled digital motion that allows you to kind of run campaigns and things like that. So, having one of those CSMs really be able to kind of function initially and drive programs through systems and things like that would be a critical first step if I were building a team from scratch. And then
Yeah.
as that evolves, that person becomes more of your customer success operations person. They're driving digital campaigns and things like that, and then you can kind of expand from there.
Wow. Very solid. Thank you for your advice. That was extremely helpful. And thank you also for the conversation, Chris. I really learned a lot, and I wish you all the best with Tutango and the merge with Catalyst.
Awesome. Thank you, Cedric. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
All right, you too.